Hi, everyone, and welcome to Portraits and Conversation. I'm Pierrette Masimango, and today I have a special guest. She is a writer, radio host, and public speaker. You have read her articles in publications you love, like Chatelaine, Men's Health, and the Globe and Mail, to name a few. You can hear her as the co-host of the Cultured podcast on Global News Radio, and you might have seen her on TVO's The Agenda, City TV's Cityline, or CBC's The National. She is B. Quammie. Hi, B.
Hi, thank you for
How,
having me.
thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. This is a good part of my day, so I'm excited to get into the conversation with you.
I'm excited to have you, and I wanted to give you a proper introduction and give you all of your props because you have been killing it like this whole, well, for a while now, but this whole summer, just, article after article and like really great like key insights. So thank you.
Thank you.
And
Oh, thank you.
yeah, this has been so this is your second career. So for
Yes.
someone who's doing like so great and you're well into the second career, can you kind of tell us how this came to be? How did you get your start?
Sure. So it goes way back to actually elementary school, and I've told this story before, but when I was in, I think it was maybe grade one or grade two, I won a writing competition. I loved to write as a kid, loved to write stories, loved to write in my journal, and there was a writing competition held at my school where a winner from each grade would get to have lunch with Robert Munch. And Robert Munch was and still is like one of my favorite children's book authors. So obviously it was like a huge deal. And I actually won for my grade. So I got to have a reception lunch with him and the other winners. And he read my story and told me it was awesome. And I
Wow.
was so excited. Yeah. And I remember just going home that day and thinking, okay, if my favorite author said my story was awesome, this is just what I'm going to do with my life. I'm just going to be a writer.
Yeah.
And my parents were kind of just like, well, that's just the thing you do for fun after you've done your homework. That's not like a job. Like, you need to get a job. And I was just like, okay, I guess it isn't a job then. I guess it is just for something fun. So, probably inspired by my mom, who's a nurse, I also love science and health and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, okay, well, you can get a job doing that. So that was kind of my educational path. So I ended up getting my degree in health sciences, studied health promotion after as a post grad, and started working in different aspects of healthcare.
Mm.
And I was working at an agency. I spent a large chunk of my healthcare career working um, and supervising group homes for adults with brain injury and developmental disability. And it was a very stressful job, especially the agency working with adults with acquired brain injury, because these are people, when you're reading their stories, they were in a car accident and got a
Yeah.
brain injury. Freak accidents in a construction site and they're getting a brain injury. And not to say that anybody deserves any type of disability or health issue, but it would be it would stick with me. I'd be walking down the street on my lunch break and I would think, wow, a car could just jump the curb and hit me, and then I could have like a 30-second memory span,
Yeah.
like some of the clients we worked with. And so it was really stressful because I'm somebody that can, I mean, people call it, being an empath or whatever it is, but it's just like being able to kind of latch into somebody's story and see yourself in their story and see how they could be reflected in yours. And so I carried work a lot with me, and it was really stressful. All that to say, um, it got to a point where I was like, I need an outlet. I
Yeah.
need to just do something to get my mind off of work when I get home. And I started a blog, just not thinking anybody was going to read it. I just remembered, I had this love of writing as a kid. Maybe I should get back into it. And so, yeah, so I started this blog, 83 to Infinity, and would just write about whatever. I'd come home from work and I'd write about, what Beyonce did that day, or I
Yeah.
would write about an aspect of health and wellness that was kind of more positive, or I would just write about my weekend, whatever, just to get my mind off of work. And I started sharing it with friends, then started sharing it on social media, and I was like, okay, let me tweet this link out and see what people think about this little blog post.
Yeah.
And I remember an editor, from an online publication called For Harriet. She found my blog, she found one of the posts, and she sent me an email saying, I've been reading your blogs and these sound amazing. You're such a great
Yeah.
writer. Would you like to write something for the publication? And I was like, you're gonna pay me to write? Like, I'm just doing this just for free, just for fun. So that kind of started writing as a side hustle, because I
Yeah.
started getting into regularly writing for Harriet, and then I started branching out, learning how to pitch and write for other publications, and continuing to work full time in healthcare, but kind of doing this on the side. And it got to a point where, it was kind of a multitude of things that happened where, I was slowly transitioning out of healthcare and working in, for a healthcare company, but working in their media and communications department. And it was a contract position that ended up ending in the middle of my second pregnancy. And I'm like, I can't go get a new job now. Like, I'm about to
Yeah.
be on mat leave. So I thought, okay, I guess I've just got to start full-time freelancing. And I was like, let me just jump into it. And that really kind of took off with the work that I was doing and the opportunities I was getting. And yeah, I kind of made the full transition after that point. And here I am. My mom calls me a professional big mouth because I do the writing, and then I
Oh,
got
yeah.
radio opportunities, TV opportunities, public speaking, and she's like, "Yeah, you get paid to be a big mouth," and I'm like, "I'll take it. That's cool. That works for me."
It's
So
kind of interesting that it's what you it was like what was in your heart, but it grew and grew. Like what's meant for you will come, and
yeah,
it eventually did. It eventually did come. And it's interesting that you mentioned For Harriet. I really love. Well, I watch her YouTube channel,
yeah,
and it's so insightful, and she always has these interesting takes, and she's also been doing
really
it
smart.
for a while. So it's really cool that that's where you got
Yeah,
kind of your start, and she gave you that opportunity, and
yeah.
look at you now.
And here I am. And I don't know why her last name is escaping me, but Kimberly.
Yes.
Kimberly is her first name. So yeah, and I was such a fan of For Harriet. So when she emailed me, I was like, I'm at this level. Like, I can
Yeah.
hang with the For Harriet content. So it was a really great confidence boost. So it was awesome.
And so you were talking about that, you wrote about everything, from pop culture to beauty to Beyonce to identity and, racial issues, microaggressions, even back, back then you've been doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
now, especially race and identity, those are front and center in like mainstream
Mm-hmm.
publications, to the point that you're writing about those things in mainstream publications. Do you find
Yeah.
that it's different now writing about them versus back then? Um,
Yeah.
do you find that the fact that it's a maybe mainstream publication, it affects maybe your authenticity, or how do you approach all of that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, because yeah, I started 83 to Infinity back in 2011. And again, I was working at an agency, supervising group homes, like I said, for adults with brain injury.
Hmm.
And I never shared my blog with anybody that I worked with, just because I wanted to keep that separate. But there was an incident where, through a bunch of random things that happen, it's every story seems to have so many layers. It involves me modeling at Toronto Fashion Week, using like Quammie as my last name when I did a news interview because I just gotten married, and somebody Googling at work my name, not the maiden name they knew, but what's this last name, Quammie? And they ended up finding my blog. Anyways, I ended up actually getting reprimanded at work
Oh no.
because I wrote about Trayvon Martin. I wrote about natural hair. I wrote about divesting from European beauty standards, like I had been following kind of in my youth. And somebody at my work felt that I was actually being racist against white people.
Mm,
That's what I was told by my boss. And it almost shut me down, because like I said, at that point I was just blogging for fun. Like, my job paid my bills. And I was like, I'm not gonna, like, I don't want to lose my job, because me and my husband were planning on buying a house, and I'm like, I need my money to
yeah.
satisfy this dream that we have. And it was really difficult. It was traumatic. um, And it was really difficult to navigate, okay, what are you going to do from here? Are you going to stand up for what you believe in with your work, or how are you going to manage that with knowing that you still need a job? And I ended up continuing to write, obviously, because that's
Good.
kind of what's brought me to where I am
Yeah.
today. All that to say, once I had started freelancing and not just writing on the blog, but taking those opportunities to write for other publications, the biggest difference is Canadian publications didn't want my pitches when it came to discussing issues around race, racism,
Mhm.
identity, and all those things. Because if I had a penny for every time an editor said they didn't think it would resonate with their audience,
Mm.
like that could have been my side hustle, is just let me just make money sending these rejected pitches to Canadian
Penny here,
publications.
penny here. Add
Exactly.
them
It would have
all
just
up.
added up.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was taking those pitches to American publications and getting the opportunities because they were so much further along in being able to have these conversations about race and actually having publications dedicated to Black audiences where this is something that these audiences want to hear. So fast forward now to 2020, and what I've seen gradually happening over the years, like you mentioned, more mainstream publications in Canada have realized, wait a minute, first of all, our audience can be a lot more diverse than what we kind of have perceived over, whatever the past decades have been. Um, and these stories are stories that are playing out in pop culture and in mainstream news. So we are missing the boat if we're not jumping on these
Yeah.
stories. So the opportunities have come now where mainstream Canadian publications are a lot more receptive and open and looking for these types of conversations.
Yeah.
And to your point around authenticity and what it means to be able to speak about these things in a mainstream space, I'm not sure for other Black Canadian writers and what their experiences have been, but for myself, I have always gone into every opportunity, especially with Canadian publications, to tell them I am going to speak about this in a way that feels necessary to me. And I say that because I want to maintain my authenticity with the blog and with even things that I share just on Twitter, things that I tweet about, things that I post on my Instagram. People have come to, I think, recognize me as somebody who speaks very frankly and with that authenticity. So I wouldn't want somebody to now pick up an article I wrote for Chatelaine and it's like, what's the softball perspective on racism? This is not what she does. And that wouldn't sit well with me. So sometimes that means with editors, once I get the draft back and I see how they've tried to soften things, I go back and I say, okay, all due respect, because you're the editor and that's a skill that, I respect that, but this is not my voice anymore.
Right.
And
And there's not
so,
a need to
yeah,
soft, like, to spoon feed the information.
exactly.
I've kind of this in this time, even talking to, because we talk about, you talked about how there are like diverse audiences that read all these publications, but even
Mhm.
white audiences, there are like people within white audiences that want and need and are looking for, you know the story to be told the way it is and not to be
Exactly.
spoon fed. And I do think that that's a disservice that maybe these publications have been doing to all of their audience by spoon
100%.
feeding and watering down. um,
100%.
it's like, why did it take so long? Why are we trying to dance around it whenever, like, it's the elephant in the room and everybody knows, you know?
Exactly. There's no need to do that. And, you know, I I get so frustrated because I do a lot of public speaking at schools as well, and especially during Black History Month when
Mhm.
people are looking for people to come in and speak to their students. And I've done everything from like junior kindergarten classes up until like grad students at U of T. And I never like to approach specifically the issue of race and racism in Canada. I never like to approach it from from a question standpoint. I'm so tired of does racism exist in Canada? Let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Does this exist? Does this happen? I start from the perspective of, so this happens. Maybe you don't know because we haven't been taught it in schools, or maybe you don't know because you don't understand outside of your metropolitan bubble what the Canadian experience is like for people in rural areas, small towns, in different provinces or territories. So I always start from this is a fact. I'm not going to start by debating or
Yeah.
opening it up for discussion if it is a fact. It is a fact. So let's start from there, because I find way too many of our conversations in this country start way back, or it starts from pointing the finger at the US. So this is happening in the States, but
Yeah.
is that here? It's like, hello, it's here. Let's not
Yeah.
ask the question. Let's just talk about the fact. So I try to just approach things as much as possible from that starting point, that this is the fact of the matter. Let's discuss from there, instead of questioning to make people feel okay with, all right, so if this does exist, then let's see
Hmm.
where we go. No,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. I don't have time
Yeah.
for that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, the article you wrote about um, active Canadian Black activism and the
Mm-hmm.
history of activism in Canada from a long time, I think that is
Mm-hmm.
a great example of just saying yes, it does exist, and we are standing on the backs of like multiple generations who've been doing this work already.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to say, like, I really enjoyed and appreciated that
Thank
article.
you.
Also because in my family, like my dad and my godfather in Montreal, they were community. Well, my godfather, he's passed away. Like they were community organizers.
Oh,
So when I
nice.
was reading
Yeah.
it, brought me back to all of the things that they were involved in doing,
Yeah.
and being a little, like, if this was like the 90s, so being a little girl and going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
community meetings and like seeing this stuff in the process. I didn't really
Yeah.
think about it back then, but
Yeah.
now that I'm like a grown woman, I
Yeah.
think back and I'm like, oh, see, this has been happening and I've been involved. I've been
Exactly. You've been
seeing it.
part of it.
So
Yeah.
it's nothing new. It's just now we're more comfortable to share,
Exactly.
so yeah.
Exactly.
And then also, speaking of sharing, you also write, I find, from a really personal space. Sometimes you share very personal stories. And,
Yeah.
this summer I've been kind of dabbling in some writing because, like we were talking about before, 2020 has been a year. Every month has felt actually like its own year. So it's
Oh
been
my gosh.
like a decade.
Yeah, honestly.
And I told you before we started recording, but I had a baby, a baby boy
Yay.
in March, and he was born like right at the beginning of the like right at the like right when we went into lockdown.
Oh,
That's when we had to go to
wow.
the hospital. So
Wow.
experiencing all of that, experiencing motherhood for the first time while also the world is like changing, it had me
It's a
thinking a
lot.
lot about like what is this world that he's inheriting, that he's like born into, and all that
Hmm.
stuff. And so it was really cathartic. I needed like a cathartic exercise to process
Yeah.
all of that. Wrote about my pregnancy. Didn't like, after I was done, it was like, okay, it's out, I published it. And then, like, I didn't think about it, right?
Yeah.
And then people started responding and they're like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And I'm like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
fine. I did the exercise, like, I'm good.
You got it out. You're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that kind of response. And I was just wondering, when you write from like a personal story, or something that's very emotional to you, is it
Hmm.
cathartic, or do you think about what people will say, or how do you approach telling very personal stories?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting because there's still a lot that I keep very private, and there's still a lot that uh, I feel doesn't need to be part of consumption for the public.
Right.
So I do keep a lot to myself, or kind of to the circle that needs to be aware or involved. But I'm also a person that I bring my full self to everything that I
Mhm.
do. And, there's been so much talk over even like the past decade or so of, as we've seen kind of the influencer space and the entrepreneur space, and the digital space and social media, and thinking about your personal brand. What's your personal brand? Who are you? And what do you do? And what are the three adjectives that people think of to describe you when they hear your name? And all these different activities that come up in these networking events and other things, right? And it's not that I try to do any of this stuff, but it's just kind of, it feels natural to me. So the same way it would feel natural to me to write that piece, like you mentioned, about Black Canadian activism and tell that history, it's just as natural for me to, in my next piece, be writing about the process of going through a separation and a divorce. Like I'm both people. So, and I don't ever really want to be known for just one thing. So I don't, as important as I think everything is, I don't ever want to just be the personal essay girl, or I just want to be the Black Canadian history girl. I want to be able to offer different things. So I find that telling those personal stories is cathartic in a couple different ways. It's cathartic to go through the process of whatever it is that I'm writing about, and find language to express feelings that maybe I haven't thought in depth about, because I'm very good at doing. I'm very good at keeping busy. I'm very good at filling my time. I'm very good about pushing through. I'm not so good at sitting with things. So
Right.
writing forces me to sit, and writing forces me to think of an emotion and describe it in a way. And so it's cathartic to help me get through whatever kind of season I'm in, but it's also cathartic in that I feel it satisfies the point that I was just making, that it helps me, it helps to show me as kind of like a well-rounded person.
Yeah.
And as people are kind of taking in my work, being able to kind of offer different things, and um, just show kind of my range in different ways, is it also feels good. So it's definitely, um, there is a lot to think about, and I don't think so much about maybe strangers, or even kind of acquaintances, or those people on Facebook that like you went to university with and you haven't really
Right.
spoke to,
Where
but
there's a bit of distance.
yeah, I don't really think about that. I think about, number one, when it comes to personal things, I think about my daughters. I think about the fact that all of this work that I'm doing is going to be part of a living testament that they can look back on.
Yeah.
And when I write about things personally, I write about motherhood. I write about, relationships, from marriage to now kind of going through the end of that. And these are all things that they are intimately a part of. So they are the number one audience that I think of. And I always think, okay, when I write this thing and I put this out in the world, and if they end up reading it in 10 years, 20 years, will I be okay with how they feel about it, or
Yeah.
how I'm guessing they might feel about it? Or is this a thing where, am I prepared to have a conversation if they have questions about it? So I would never put something out there that obviously that would harm them in any way, or anything to that nature. Um, but and I am very careful about making sure that I'm just telling my story.
Yeah.
Even when I'm speaking about marriage or divorce, I never want to speak for anybody else. So
Right.
I try to formulate my writing so that I'm telling you my story in this process, so that nobody can feel like they've kind of been dragged through something
Right.
without their consent as well. So I kind of think about those things, and I filter that through so that I can feel like I'm telling my most authentic, I'm sharing my most authentic perspective without causing undue harm to anybody else, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
And you mentioned your girls. Do they inspire you? Do they inspire your work? Aside from them being okay with what you've written,
Mhm.
down the line, as you're writing, do you pull any inspiration from them?
Oh, 100%, 100%. They are just, so, when I kind of started getting really serious about the trajectory I was going on in terms of writing and media opportunities and things of that nature, I was always kind of thinking about the young girl that I was. And that young girl who grew up in London, Ontario, and didn't see many representations of anybody that looked like her family on TV or in magazines or in the books that we studied at school. And feeling like the work I'm doing now, I'm thinking about that little girl and providing the things that she wished she could have had.
Wow.
Now having two daughters of my own, I'm able to use them, and I'm like, okay, I'm thinking about them being the little girls right now, and I'm like, okay, I'm giving you guys, even if you see nothing else,
Yeah.
and luckily there is a lot more now for them than there was for me,
Yeah.
but even if there's nothing else, they can see the types of things mommy was writing about and talking about. Mommy was talking about Black history, Black womanhood, racism, all of these different things. They can get that. They can see me when I am on City Line or on the National. They can see me there with my natural hair, my big hoop earrings, and my red lips, and just being
Mm.
myself. They can see that. My daughter, my older one, has come with me a couple times when I've done tapings for my radio show, and now she says she wants to do radio too. That's what
That's
she wants her
amazing.
job to be. So they definitely inspire me in terms of me wanting to create the things for them that I didn't have. But they also inspire me because they're both fearless in very different ways. So my older daughter, she's fearless she's a true extrovert. So you could drop her in the middle of anywhere. She's 6 years old. You could drop
Wow.
her anywhere. She will make friends. Doesn't matter if it's a kid, doesn't matter if it's somebody in their 40s, doesn't matter if it's somebody in their 80s. She will make friends. She will figure out where she needs to be, who she needs to talk to, what she needs to do to get what she wants. Like, she is a people person. She is so much more extroverted than I am. Like, it exhausts me. And sometimes I have to say to her, if we go
Wow.
say grocery shopping, I have to like prep her, like our moms would prep us and be like,
Yeah.
don't touch anything,
Nope,
don't ask for anything,
not
I'm not
getting
buying this.
this. Mm-mm.
That I don't have those
Yeah.
with her. It's like, we're not going to make friends with everybody today. Let's just be quiet. Let's just go in, get what we need. We're not going to make friends with the people shopping. We're not going to make friends with the cashier. That's the talk I have to give her.
Oh my
Otherwise,
gosh.
she'd be making friends with everybody. So she's fearless in that she is not afraid of anyone.
Yeah.
And my younger one is 3, and she's has a very different personality from her sister. She's a lot more quiet. She's a lot more sensitive, but she is fearless in like a very physical sense. If there's a threat, if something scares her, she runs towards it to like get rid of it. She doesn't run away from it. She will defend anybody, if it, well, not anybody, but people close to her, me, her father, her sister. If she feels that something or somebody's threatening us, she's jumping and putting her body in between
Wow.
and that thing. She's not as much a people person, but she is so fearless in terms of, I will defend who I love, and I will put myself in harm's way, and I'll run towards the danger. And their fearlessness inspires me to bring that to my work, to be authentic. Like, my older one, she's not afraid of anybody, and I think about that when I deal with imposter syndrome. And it's like, well, if she ain't afraid of anybody, I shouldn't be intimidated. She, like, nobody intimidates her, and she's 6. You
Yeah.
can't intimidate me. Like, she's just going off of the fact that she just thinks she's fabulous.
Wow.
I should at least think I'm fabulous. Plus, I have education. Plus, I've been living on this earth a lot longer than her.
Yeah.
So if she's not intimidated, I shouldn't be intimidated. And my younger one, with her, just how fierce she is about defending what's important to her, it also inspires my work, in that whether it's myself, whether I'm talking about Black history, whether I'm talking whatever it is, if I feel so strongly in the story that I'm trying to tell, I'm going to defend that with everything. So I would say their fearlessness, not just the fact that they're on this earth and I want to provide those things for them, but I see how they're fearless in different ways, and I try to like learn from them with that in my work too.
Wow. Like I'm so inspired by so many things that you just that you just said. I'm like trying to make a mental Rolodex, but one like there's a couple of things, but one of the
Yeah.
things you mentioned is that you wanted to be the example that you didn't have, or like we didn't have a lot of examples of Black
Yeah.
people in the media, and so you're doing that, you're giving your daughters that gift. And I
Hmm.
just think about, like, in from a generational perspective,
Yeah.
our parents, many of us were, our parents were or are immigrants,
Hmm.
and they came, and the goals were different, and
Yes.
maybe and I definitely see it in my parents, more like, don't make too much of a stink, just work really hard, work your way
Right.
up. And I see over the decades that that has been a really great, uh, way or approach of going about things, and they're
Hmm.
great now. But definitely maybe they put some aspirations to the side because it was all about hustling, and they
Yeah.
maybe pass that down to me, where it's like, well, no, you shouldn't do this like super artistic thing that isn't really like guaranteed. You have to go for
Exactly.
guaranteed. Doctor, lawyer, nurse, engineer, like, those things. And
Exactly.
so now, you being of a next generation, you kind of being like, well, I can give maybe my
Yeah.
parents couldn't give that to me, and they told me to go into science, but I can give that to my daughter, so that the next
Yeah.
generation can really feel like they can do anything they want.
For
That
sure.
was really touching, you know.
Yeah.
So
It's so real. Yeah, because I mean, I think about it. I remember a conversation I had with my mom a couple years ago, and my parents came from Jamaica, and we were having a conversation about speaking patois. And my mom was saying when she was a kid, her dad always said, okay, this is just how you speak in the house, but when you leave the
mhm,
house you have to speak proper English, and you have your manners and all these different types of things. And I was really in my like radical bag, and I was like, no, that's respectability politics, and you should be proud, and patois is a language and you should be proud of it, and you should speak it, and da 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 da. And we actually got into kind of an argument in a way, because what it came down to was the fact that at one point she just said, you know what, we just had to do what we had to do to survive. And this is what you have to do to survive. You couldn't get a job if you walked in the place speaking a certain way. Um, and I had to really take myself out of where I was and try to put myself in that position to understand so many of the decisions our parents made, and in even generations before them, it was all about survival, especially like you said, with the generation of our parents who immigrated to a new country to rebuild a new life and hoping for something better. They sacrificed so much,
mhm,
and they faced so much coming to a place like Canada, and you know settling maybe in cities or towns. Like my mom, first when she first came, she like she lived in Toronto for a while, but they started their family in London, which was not as diverse as Toronto at all. So dealing with racism, dealing with all that, it's like, okay, well, what they had to do was just keep their heads down, not
yeah,
make too much of a fuss, just work hard, and they would be rewarded for that. And a lot of them have. But now I look at the ways in which, like, even our generation is still very much in survival mode in a lot of different ways. But
mhm,
when I think about the fact that I was able to kind of transition out of, yes, the stable healthcare career, and follow my love of writing, there's a privilege in that, and there's a thriving in that, that I feel, this is something that if each generation wants better for the next generation, then this is me satisfying what my parents sacrificed for as
yeah,
well, even if they don't see it that way. Like when I started doing writing, I think my dad's like, but are you gonna go back to med school? Like, this is cute, but you gonna go back and be a doctor? Like, and I'm like, daddy,
it's funny
we'll
you
see.
mentioned that med school is still one of those things where it's
Oh
like,
god.
I think that ship has sailed, but sometimes every so often
It's
it comes
still
back.
it yeah, I'm like, that ship is long gone, but every once in a while he brings it up. But even if they don't see it, me being able to do this type of work speaks to the sacrifices that they made, because now here we are in a place where, yes, I can have a better life. I'm just broadening out what that better looks like. It's not
Mm,
just the stable job, it's being able to follow to some degree the
your
path that I
heart.
want to follow as well. Exactly, and follow
Yeah.
my heart. So, and yeah, if that can inspire my kids and the next generation to go even further,
Yeah.
I totally get it from the parent perspective, as far as you want the best for your kids, you want them to be safe and all that kind of stuff. But there's so much more to life. So yeah.
Yeah. And then you also, like, I was listening to you talk about your daughters, how your older daughter is a true extrovert,
Hmm.
and she helps you with kind of like imposter syndrome. And then your younger daughter will defend, the ones she loves to a T, and that helps you
Hmm.
like defend your work. And to me, it just sounded like, you know, like this cycle of you give to them and they give back to you, because those are elements that are in you that you gave to
Mm,
them, and then now it's like it's coming back to you and helping you in
yeah.
other ways that it's just like really beautiful. I
It's
find.
yeah, it's so interesting. And you're 6 months in, but you're gonna see it too. You're gonna see it too,
Yeah.
where they become reflections. Like you have these moments where you realize they are reflections, and not just like, oh, he's got my nose, or he's got daddy's smile, or whatever. Not just that, but like you said, they become reflections of the things that you have put into them through whatever, intentional or mystical way it happens. um, and going into motherhood, I knew that I did not want to be the type of parent who looked at my kids as like mini me's. So they're just going to do everything that I would do, and I'm going to live through my kids. So I had dreams of doing X, Y, and Z, and I couldn't accomplish them. So I'm going to tell my kid that that's what they got to do. Um, I look at children as their own little beings, and I I give them I give them room to be themselves, is part of it as well. And that's something that I was very intentional about. I do things like, if I mess up, I apologize to them.
Mhm.
And, I let them know that this relationship is a two-way thing. Yes, they have to have a certain level of respect because I'm mom, but I respect them as well, because I want them to be able to grow up and not just think of themselves kind of in deference to somebody else. Like,
Yeah.
I had to listen to mommy and daddy, and I had to listen to my teachers, and I had to listen to this person, and now I've got to listen to my spouse, and I've got to listen to. No, I want them to be full people. So I think about those things intentionally. And then, like you're saying, as I'm thinking about the ways that things are reflected back to me, and I'm learning from them, or I'm inspired by them, then it's like, oh wait, they had to get that from somewhere. So
Mhm.
okay, maybe they got that from me in some moment that I don't even realize in myself. And it's a really cool full circle moment.
Yeah.
Like, it's really cool to be able to see those things and to think of them as like, reflections, even though it's like a kaleidoscope. Like, we're connected. You shake it up, and yes, I've got my life here, and my older one and my younger one, we all have our own experiences, but we're part of the same thing. And
Yes.
it's so funny, even with girls. And um, I mean, I don't want to get too like stuck in the binary of like biology and stuff like that, but my older one was asking me about things about where babies come from and all this stuff, and I was having a conversation with her explaining like eggs and sperm, and kind of like,
Yeah.
the most appropriate way to explain that to a 6-year-old. But I said, it kind of popped into my head, and I said, what's really cool? I said, so I was in, they call my mom Yaya.
Mhm.
So I was like, I was in Yaya's tummy. I was part of me. I was a part of a little egg that was in Yaya's tummy. And I said, when you're born with eggs. So I said, you've got eggs that are going to help to make your baby if you want to have a baby. So I said, if you think of it, and she has like these little dolls that like go one into the
Yeah.
other. And so I kind of used those to explain to her, like, you were already kind of in Yaya, because when Yaya was pregnant with me, the egg that made you was in me. And
Yeah.
I started speaking about it, and I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm getting too deep and if she gets it. And then she was like, wait, like the dollies. And she was like putting them together. So she's like, So we were in Yaya too. That's so cool. And my baby was in you, so we're all connected. And I was like, yeah, that's
Yes.
kind of the idea. So it's cool to think about the ways that we're connected, but then to also give them room to be who they are, and then to also think back like, okay, this is they've gotten some of this from me. So even though I thought I was lacking this thing,
Yeah.
something had to be in me to give it to them. So yeah,
Yes.
it's a
Beautiful.
really cool thing. Yeah.
Beautiful. And so like as a Black mom though, is there anything that you try to give them purposely because
Mm,
of, like we were saying, the world we live in, um,
yes.
be- to prepare them, or like how do you approach that side of it also, because I want to take
Yeah.
some notes.
Yeah, for sure. It's so real. Like um I wrote about this once for, I think it was for Refinery 29, because of a debate that I saw in, I don't know if you're any of like Facebook's parenting groups. Some of them can be kind of wild. So I've pulled back from a lot
No,
of
I
them.
actually haven't joined any group. I don't know. I feel it would be too overwhelming to see too much
Too
stuff.
many things. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, pace yourself. Pace yourself.
yeah. I pull from like my friends and
Got it. Yeah.
I know,
Especially
but
you're early in. So yeah, there's enough to overwhelm you. So
yeah.
um but there was a discussion that I saw. I am part of one group called Black Moms Connection. So obviously that's just Black moms, but I was in another Facebook parenting group, and it was, any type of mom. And there was a discussion going on about not wanting, somebody posted a link to like an article, I think from like the New York Times, and it was related to girls and their confidence and things of that nature. And so all of these moms were saying, I always tell my daughter she's smart and she's brilliant. And I don't tell her she's pretty. I focus on all of the other aspects because I don't want her to just think that her beauty is all that matters. And I was reading it and I'm like, I get it. But my daughters are at this point in time not reflective of what the general standard of beauty is. So for
Mhm.
me to not tell my daughters they're beautiful is not teaching them necessarily that beauty doesn't matter.
Mhm.
It's teaching them that they're not beautiful. And we live in a society that is going to show them that one way or another. So I wrote a piece saying, just speaking to the fact that I will always tell my daughters they're beautiful, in addition to you're brilliant, you're
Mhm.
brave, you're funny, um, because of that dynamic. And I kind of wrote that in response to other non-Black moms, specifically white moms, who were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you tell your daughter she's pretty." It's like, hell yeah, I do, because
Yeah.
who else is going to tell her? So it's things like that. It's things like from day one, my older one, she was born like a full afro. She came out, and I'm like, this hair needs to be braided up, stat, because I don't know what we do with all this hair. And it starts with even just washing her hair, and her sister now as well, where I make sure I don't say anything like, oh, your hair's so tough, oh,
Yeah.
your hair's so bad. I speak love over their hair so that they love it, and they know that there's nothing wrong with it. And if I'm combing it and it tangles and it pulls and it hurts, I apologize to them. I'm like, oh, mommy's not using the right comb, or mommy didn't put enough conditioner.
Yeah.
I don't ever want them to think, oh, my hair, it hurts when mommy does it because my hair is bad. Like, I take responsibility for
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
because I don't want them to have any of that weight on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And even now with my older one being in school, and honestly, the schools she's been in have been, at least with the student base, have been pretty diverse. Um, so she has other Black girls in her class, and kids of other races and things as well. And there are a lot of conversations that come up where now she's starting to learn more about what racism is, and she's understanding more about actually like police brutality and things of that nature. And so we have conversations with her that are kid appropriate, but understanding like this is the world we live in, where yes, people are not nice to other people just because of the way they look.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to that you will learn as you get older. We actually had a big conversation because I took her and her sister out to a park the other day, and we're getting ready to leave, and I'm getting them back in the car. And a Black guy and a white guy were like walking through the park. and it looked like they were having like a heated argument. And then I just saw like the black guy just clock the white guy in the face. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I need to get these kids out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And they were kind of coming closer to the parking lot. And just from what I could hear, it sounded like the white guy had called the black guy the N word. And so the black guy was like retaliating. And he's like, oh, you want to call me an N-word? You want to call me an N-word? I'll show you an N-word. And so I was like, okay, I understand what's going on now.
Yeah.
But so my kids were watching. And then when the black guy saw that I was there with my kids, he apologized. He's like, I'm sorry. He's like, I got to handle this though, but I'm sorry. He's like, I'm sorry. I don't want to scare the kids. And so I asked the girls once we left, I said, were you guys scared? And so they were both like, no, I think they were more confused. They didn't know what was going on. And my older one said, what was the word he is saying? What did that guy call him?
Yeah.
And so I had to explain to her what it was and what that meant in context and all these different types of things. And so it's a lot of conversation. I never want to withhold anything from them. And I don't have a son, so I understand, for parents with black sons, obviously from what we have seen historically and present day, there's a very visceral feeling around protecting black sons. But I make sure that I'm just as vigilant. If I had a son and my two daughters, I'm just as vigilant because they're going to feel this in different ways. My daughters are going to bear the brunt of being in a sexist and racist society in a different way that, my potential black son would face. But I want them to understand the context of the world that we're living in, but be armed with the confidence to know that that doesn't define them, if that makes sense. So, as they get older, I'm sure there's going to be many, many more conversations to have with them about it. And it's always hard to know like what is age appropriate. But their kids are smarter than we give them credit for. And most of the time they're actually, they're ready for a lot of conversations that we think they're not ready for. Right. And sometimes we just don't want to have the conversation because we know they're going to ask questions that we don't want to answer. So it's like, it's not about the kid, it's about us. So we have to kind of check our own egos and get rid of living in our comfort zone in order to give them what they need too. So, because she's 6 and some of the things she asked me, I'm just like, okay, I wasn't expecting us to talk about that yet, but you look like you want to know the answer. So exactly.
And it's like, it forces you to do the work that we try to avoid, and you have to do that work because whatever you instill in them at 6 and at this age means that they'll be so much better prepared into adulthood, and it won't they'll be able to navigate these conversations with so much more ease. And even I see the Gen Z, the younger, a generation younger than us, and I already find that they're so much better able to talk about diversity and inclusion and use correct terms, and it's not real, and talk about themselves in terms of diversity and inclusion. It's not really it's not as much of a thing as I'd say our generation or older generations where it's
exactly,
we're gonna do this, we're gonna talk about and it's well, no, let's just all chill and talk about it. But I so to see the younger generations being better equipped to talk about this stuff, and to know as a parent that it's my responsibility to help equip my children, or my child right now, maybe my children in the future. I just think it'll help them to be able to navigate those conversations. So, we got to do the work so that they can, be comfortable. So, yeah. And so, I guess my last question to you is, thinking about how 2020 has been crazy and it's still not over. Is there anything that you haven't written about or talked about on your show or in the different things you do that you would love to address or write about or anything?
Ooh, it's a big question. And it's something I've been thinking about because I just signed with two literary agents to start working on a book project, and now it's like the door's wide open. What do you want to write about? What do you want to do?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I could just do whatever. Um, I think what's been on my mind for some time now. Last year, I call it like in the before times when like
Yes.
we could actually do
It was a
things.
different era. It was.
Exactly, a totally different era. So last year in August, I went to Barbados and did crop over with my girls, and that was amazing. And then in October, I went on a press trip to Antigua. And since especially the Antigua trip, and because my background is a Caribbean background as well, I've been thinking so much about the Caribbean tourism industry and how this new kind of global social justice movement that we're in as it relates to race and identity, how
Mhm.
it's going to impact. And why I say that is because going on this press trip, obviously like it was sponsored through the tourism board, so they lined up every day different activities and things for us to see
Mhm.
the island. It was phenomenal, but so much of the tourism was based on colonialism.
Mm.
And I kind of understood because like 95% of the other travelers that would be in these excursions were all folks from like white folks from America, but mainly from the UK. So so many of the tours and the different tourist stops was like Fort such and such named after this captain who came from Britain, and this fort
Yeah.
and this ship, and I'm just like, all I'm hearing about like, you only tell me about the white people who came here and did stuff. Like, what did the black people do? Because I know the black people been doing stuff here. And what really triggered that feeling for me was we also went on because I was doing some travel writing at the time, so we went to tour different resorts, and they took us to a brand new resort that hadn't opened yet, and it was built on grounds that were called the Devil's Bridge, and I was like, okay,
Oh.
this is an interesting name.
Uh-huh.
So they took us there, and our bus driver explained that Devil's Bridge was a cliff, and it was a cliff where when enslaved people were brought to Antigua, they would either jump off that cliff to try to swim back to Africa,
Mhm.
or they would escape from the sugar plantations and run to that cliff to commit suicide to escape
Wow.
slavery. And then so hearing that story and then going on a tour of the resort and being like, oh, the most expensive rooms are the ones with the view of Devil's Bridge because the sunset is just magnificent. And I'm like,
Yeah.
is nobody else
Mhm.
triggered
Yeah.
by this? And I was the only black person on the press trip as well. So I'm sitting there, everybody else is smiling, thinking, oh, this is beautiful. And I'm like in tears because I'm like, these are ancestors who chose to die here.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that if I want to come stay at your resort, I got to pay top dollar to stay here to see the sunset? Like,
Yeah, the irony is,
oh my
yeah.
God. It was, so I left that trip, and there was a day we were supposed to actually go to a museum that was on a restored sugar plantation to learn about the history of enslavement in Antigua. And the day we went, it was closed. So they didn't even, that
Mhm.
wasn't even planned properly for me to get that history.
Mhm.
So I left there thinking like, I would really love, and again, this was before the pandemic hit, but I would really love to, if I had the funds and if, COVID wasn't a thing, I would be trying to travel to different Caribbean islands to understand what does your tourism look like when it's based on the colonial gaze versus
Mhm.
when you are speaking about the Afrocentric gaze, and looking around the world, seeing what's happening with Black Lives Matter and all of these different things, that is not just an American issue or a North American issue. This is everywhere. Um, how are these countries, knowing that tourism is, what makes most of the money in the geographical area, how are you changing and evolving to keep up with this? Because people are going to be traveling now not just to hear about that old white man who came here and did whatever. People are going to travel to understand more about the Black experience other than just carnival.
Yeah.
So it's a long answer, but that's something that has been on my mind, to really understand and unpack the evolution of the Caribbean tourism industry as it relates to breaking away from colonialism. Like we just heard, Barbados is going to change to a republic
Yes.
and not be listed as, as a colony of the UK.
Yeah.
And that, I think Trinidad and Tobago is the only other island that has made itself a republic. So it's like we're seeing islands now breaking ties
Yeah.
to the UK. How is that going to trickle down into other things? So,
That's really
it's just,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating to me. So that's probably a dream project. If I could write about that, if I could do a documentary, if I could write a book, I'm like, COVID needs to get out of here so I can
Yeah.
like
It
go
really
apply for
does.
some grants and start doing this, among other things, obviously, and very, much more serious things that we'd benefit from getting rid of COVID. But that would be a dream for me, to be able to
Um,
kind of explore that.
that's really fascinating. Like just even having you write this as opposed to, and there's been histories of the Caribbean that
Mm-hmm.
have been done by, you know, not Black women or Black people, and being
Right.
able to compare just your thought process, the things that like your experience in
Mm-hmm.
relation to what you notice and what you choose to highlight in the history. I think
Yeah.
that will be really interesting. So I really hope that you do make that
Thank
project
you.
happen. And
Yes, fingers crossed.
congratulations on getting signed.
Thank you.
That must have been like a bucket list
Ooh. Honestly,
accomplishment. Yeah.
something I didn't even think was going to happen yet. So,
So there
our
you go.
timing is not really our timing.
You deserve all of the props because you've been really putting in a lot of work. So I'm
Thank
so
you.
thankful that you chose to spend some time with me and share. There's been so much insight, and I'm always so grateful to have these conversations because it
Yeah,
gets me thinking in different ways. And I obviously
for
love
sure.
hearing from from everyone. So thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
And
you.
um, obviously, this is Portraits and Conversations. So there are portraits that are joining this conversation that we've just had. So you can go to the accompanying blog to see the entire photo set. And also, if you want to see more from B, I will link her website and her writing portfolio and all of her links with this blog and wherever you're seeing this, like on Instagram or YouTube, so that you can check out her work because it is really great work. So thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for creating this space and for giving room to speak so freely. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, I'll talk to you soon,
All
and
right.
we will catch up next time.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.